Hey, John, students are protesting. They're asking their universities to divest investing from Israel. Does divesting even work? Is this a good strategy? What are they after? How does this happen? That's what we're going to be talking about today on Friends Talk Financial Planning. Hi, I'm Bridget Sullivan-Mermel. I've got a fee-only financial planning practice in Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm John Shear. I've got a fee-only financial planning practice in Middleton, Wisconsin. And before we dig into this divestment issue, I want to remind everybody to hit that subscribe button. Subscribing helps other people find our show on YouTube, and we're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. So with that, I'm interested to really dig into this a little bit. This is an area that I honestly don't have a ton of insight into, like what actually happens when you're talking about this. Like, is it useful? And you mentioned that in the introduction, Bridget, is here the students are asking for this thing, and I always sort of wonder, okay, you're asking for this. Do you even know what you're really asking for? Does that really work, sort of thing, right? And I know you've done a ton of homework on this. I'm really interested to dig in here.
Yeah, I've been an environment or an ESG nerd for quite a while, so I can tell you all about this. All right. So let's talk about 4 phases of protesting. The first phase is establishing a moral leadership. So this is somebody of the overall saying this is bad. Okay, so with smoking, we had the American Cancer Society saying, hey, this is bad. We want to cut down on smoking. Okay, so and it's an established place, and they're saying it's bad. Okay, that's the first step, is moral leadership. And then the second the second step is generally protesting. And oftentimes this is students protesting against their own university. And this, what they're looking for now is divesting. All right, so let's talk through divesting, and if divesting itself actually makes a big impact. Okay, so there's 2 parts of divesting. There's me, Bridget Sullivan-Mermel, divesting, and then there's like endowments and universities. Okay, so obviously the universities are going to have more impact than me. But then let's talk about the mechanics of investing, all right, or of divesting. When there was a shooting recent in Chicago or around Chicago, there are a lot of times. And so one of my clients was like, I want out of guns. I want to be totally done with guns. And so I proceeded to try to figure out how to get guns out of this person's portfolio. And it turns out there really weren't guns in the person's portfolio, because there were really only 3 gun manufacturers that were listed on an exchange, and they were all small caps. Okay. So divesting from guns really only meant getting out of 3 small stocks. Okay. So that's not a big impact. And I don't know if that would really hit the spot for this client. And then the next level of getting out of it is, well, what about these other people like that sell guns? Okay. Well, it seems like there's a lot of small gun shops. They're not listed on the exchanges, but then you have like Walmart. Okay, so that's kind of problematic. I mean, you might want to get out of Walmart for different reasons, not just guns, like, so that's kind of interesting too. And then you have places like, and I'm not even sure that they still sell guns, but like Gander Mountain. All right, so, but again, you have to ask yourself, is this going to hit the spot? If you divest from Walmart, and like what percentage of Walmart is actually guns? It seems like a minor percentage of it, of Walmart is guns sales. Okay. Right. I don't know for sure, but I've been to a Walmart, and I can tell you that I reached a lot of things that I don't even think I've found any guns. So that's the next thing, is that going to really help you feel any better if you get out of there? Okay, so then we get to the current situation where we've got a small country with not that big of an economy, and they're definitely not in the US, right? So it's like, and when I looked this up, and they have, of the world economy or the world capitalization, they have about 0.2% of the entire world's stock market. Yep. If you look at just international, it was about 0.5% of the entire international. And people that look at this say, okay, but, and if you get out of it, there's no, when people looked at what happened with South Africa divestment, they said it didn't really impact their stock market much, because other people, neutral parties will go in and buy their stocks. And also when a company has issued a stock already, they don't have that much, I don't think they care that much who buys it. Like after it's issued, it's on the market, and it, like who owns it doesn't make that much of a difference to them. And so when you looked at the research on South Africa, that didn't really impact things. Okay. Any questions?
I think that's a really interesting point that and again, I haven't thought a whole lot about this, but as you think about, okay, we've got stocks, right? And there's an Israeli company that we're investing in. And if I heard it right, 0.5% of the overall international stock market is from Israel. And if I'm one of the protesters, I say, geez, we should not invest in Israeli stock companies, right? Take our money out of the company. That company, XYZ company in Israel doesn't care who owns the stock, because that doesn't make their, other than what, maybe their corporate officers get, stock options, they're happy with that. But the company's productivity, right? The sales and that's from when they sell their widgets or whatever it is that they do, or their services, right? That's where the company's pocketbook is, if you will. The stock is just the investors. Is that right?
Right. Okay.
Yeah, interesting.
But they're still trying hard, right? Okay. And so there's two things going on here. All right. We got first, if protesters can create stigma, that is impactful. That gives you impact. Okay. And with South Africa, that's really what happened. And same with smoking. Creating stigma around the topic is more important than the actual result of, are you taking money out of Israel? Somebody else will invest in Israel. But creating this stigma matters. So it's like the bad PR is worse for the company, for the opposition of the cause, than divesting. So creating this bad PR is what they're trying to avoid, right? Because that next level of 3, is pension funds getting out and institutional investors saying, okay, we want out. All right. So now we're talking some real money.
But again, doesn't that, if the institutional investors leave, that's the investment part going away, but it doesn't affect
more stigma. Okay, so we have, so bigger stigma, more established people saying I want out, or more established institutions. Okay, so they're creating more stigma. And then the fourth thing is what actually impacts things, and that's legislation and lawsuits. Okay, so for instance, in the 80s, during the South Africa, they created enough stigma so that the US passed a law that really mattered, that had enough support so that they passed a law, both houses of Congress, that had enough support to override a threatened veto by Reagan. Okay, so I mean, that seems inconceivable now, but that's what they did. They could withstand a veto if it came to that. Okay, so that's how much stigma was created and how much support they had, and that is what really matters. And same with cancer. It's not about it's about the lawsuits. That's where you really create misery for these companies and these countries, is when it gets up to that fourth level. Okay.
Yeah, interesting.
There you go. Yeah.
What law was it that was passed, or what type of laws? I don't need, but like the South African thing, was it then, were individuals then not buying South African goods
Well,
because
more,
of some
restricting trade, that's the thing.
So big, higher level than individuals buying things. It's the corporate primarily side of things.
Right. Yeah. So you can see, if you move it up the ladder, that's where it really matters. And so it's interesting. There's a lot of work on fossil fuels and making portfolios that are carbon neutral, et cetera. And that's a really interesting case, because I think it's kind of both. There's certainly a lot of political work about, there's stigma, there's political work, but it's such a complicated issue. It's so big that it seems like it's hard to say, okay, these protests are having a direct line to impact, have action.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, really interesting that it's not necessarily the divestiture that's the end goal. I wonder if the protesters know
For the
that.
individual students that are out there, that might be what they're thinking. But
Right,
from somebody's thinking about the bigger picture.
right, right. And an interesting dichotomy of the things that maybe the protesters, to put words in their mouth, right? Here's what I think is important is that we don't invest in those things. That's not really what is the important thing, right? Of doing that, because that's not going to change the economies of those
Not going
companies.
to change the university much. I mean, it's a small, like, this is an
Right. But
example.
what that does, the consequences, intended or unintended.
Yeah, yeah. And oil is an example of something that's large,
Yeah.
like fossil fuels. Geez, that's huge. So, but it's just a lot more complicated. It seems to me like protests, et cetera, one sliver of changing things. And of course they do get action, but it's like so complicated and it's so widely used. It's such a big part of our economy. It's hard to divest, just like the gun manufacturers to the Gander Mountain example,
Yeah.
or Walmart. Like, oh, so many people are involved. Cool.
Yes. Super interesting, all the layers that go into that. Yeah, this is a great place to wrap things up. Again,
Yeah.
I'm John Shear. I run a fee-only financial planning practice in Middleton, Wisconsin.
And I'm Bridget Sullivan Ramel. I've got a fee-only financial planning practice in Chicago, Illinois. We're both proud members of ACP, the Alliance of Comprehensive Planners, which is a group of like-minded advisors, a not-for-profit group. And you can find, if you're looking for an advisor in your area, you can check out acplanners.org.
And don't forget to hit that subscribe button.